Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Queen of Scots. Everyone bangs on about Mary Queen of Scots. Our life, our death, our folly, our sadness. All too often, they do it from a perspective of post-industrial TV generations. But today, we are going to go deeper. So if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen. And if you enjoy this video, then give it a thumbs up, share it, and watch the next one. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Mary Queen of Scots dominates popular conception of the history of Scotland. But you can't really understand her without the context of her time. The problem is that the brightness of her star obscures the Scotland in which she lived. The good news is that here at the Wardlaw Museum in St Andrews, there's an exhibition that will help us understand the life and language of the time. And waiting for me is Amy Blakeway, a brainy prof type from St Andrews University, who's really good at translating. Amy!
Bruce, finally!
Sorry, I'm a wee bit late.
Good to see you. Better late than never.
I know, we're here now. Now, people think about Mary Queen of Scots, and everyone, when they think about her, thinks about her death. That's a big drama. But there were loads of dramatic things at her birth. Can you tell us about the people and events at that time in history?
100%. So if you could just step a wee bit back, so I've got a lovely prop here for you, my family tree, to talk you through it.
Right.
So this is Mary down here as an adult.
Yeah.
And when she died, like all of us, she inherits loads of stuff from her family. So she's got French inheritance from her mum, Mary of Guise, her dad, James V, King of Scots. But he's got a mixed inheritance as well. He's got his dad, King of Scots, and then his mum, Margaret Tudor, elder sister of Henry VIII.
So we've got an interracial marriage.
Well, an Anglo-Scottish marriage, certainly. So we've got this marriage between the two of them. And what that means is that Mary's not just significant because she's going to inherit Scotland, as she does on her dad's death. If things go wrong down south, she'll inherit England too.
Yeah.
And that means she's a threat.
As is our right.
Well, I mean, that's her line, absolutely. And I'm a scholar of her, so that's what I'd say too. So she's got her great uncle Henry VIII. Now, he hears about James V's death. He realises the threat Mary has. It seems ridiculous, this wee girl of 6 days old, but she's a threat. And so he thinks, I need to neutralise this. And while I do that, I can make my country more secure. So he proposes, why doesn't this baby wee girl marry his son? Sorry, just leaning back over the case. Edward VI, future Edward VI at this stage, Edward, Prince of Wales. If they marry, because Edward's the husband and it's the 16th century, Mary will pass into his legal care, his legal curatory, and so will everything she possesses. So the woman's got a kingdom for a dowry. And Henry VIII thinks this is going to be Anglo-Scottish union. He's particularly worried about his inheritance, old Henry, because as we know, Henry VIII, 6 wives, and we also know that's linked to him embracing Protestantism.
Yes.
Scotland's remained Catholic, so Henry's really isolated in Europe. So he thinks he's got a good chance to make himself more secure. He offers this marriage. The Scots say thanks, but no thanks. Henry VIII invades, that's in 1544. And then there's 6 years on and off of really bloody Tudor invasion of Scotland, a really horrible conflict, a nasty war.
So can you tell us about some of the similarities and differences at that time to our time today?
I would absolutely love to, Bruce, but to do that, we'll have to head right this way and see a couple of very special objects.
Right, okay, let's go.
Okay, Bruce, I wanted to show you stuff over here because I think this really makes the 16th century seem a little bit scarily familiar. So this is about the impact of war on ordinary people.
Right.
First thing we're going to talk about is inflation.
And as we're talking, the Americans have been bombing Iraq, and that's very much Iran, which is very much part of our conversation in the news today, isn't
Absolutely, and it also spreads back, of course, with the impact of the war on Ukraine on prices. This is something, unfortunately, we're very, very familiar with in 2026. And so in the 1540s wars, it's exactly the same thing. And here we've got the price of wheat, the most basic commodity, makes your bread, really what you feed your family with, and it doubled during the period of war. And we can see these 2 little packs of coins. These are all low value value coins, the kinds that like peasant Amy and peasant Bruce would have had, not what the nobility would have had.
I think Bruce might not be a peasant.
Well, I certainly was. I'm sorry for lumping you in with me. But the point is, we've got an over doubling of the price of wheat. That's a massive impact on people's food. So we've got inflation.
And what are the coins there?
So these are pennies, which are the really, really tiny ones, and bawbees, which are the little bigger ones at the back. And so we've got, 15 pence in 1540, 2 years before the war, and 33 pence in the last year of the conflict. So massive increase. So we've got inflation. We also have shrinkflation. These tankards at the back are the official volume measures of the borough of Dundee. Right. Each town had its own measures in this period. And very sadly, by the end of the war, in the early 1550s, the borough orders new measures to be made half the size of the original ones because, and this is a direct quote, the poor folks cannot afford the full size measure. So we've got an increase in prices and shrinkflation.
In this?
So these would have been liquid measures, but you could also, I guess, have done dry volume goods in them. So you could think about people buying ale, perhaps wine, but maybe also dry goods. So it's, volume measures. But these aren't the half size ones. These are the full size ones. But they give us a real insight, I think, into kind of the measures and the coins. Like imagine going into the market and really thinking, as we have in the supermarket today, oh my God, what can I afford this week? What's happened to the prices? If the food's even there, because if it had been burned, it might well not have been.
Yes.
So there's huge scarcity. So there's pressure kind of coming from the marketplace. There's also pressure coming from the government. Scotland did win this war in the end. The English were repulsed with a little help from our old friends, the French. But that came at a cost. It was hugely expensive. And so taxes went through the roof. And here we've got an account for one of those taxes. Now, if taxes go high to increase government revenue, that's also taxation that's coming out of our pockets. And so we're seeing people really pushed between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the government's asking more and more and more in the form of taxes. And on the other hand, your food costs are going up and up and up. So I think there's a lot of really kind of similar dynamics to what we're seeing at the moment with our current economy. There's also something which is thankfully a bit less relevant now, but when I was doing this research in 2020, it's been going on a long time, it became disturbingly relevant, and that is the plague. In 1545, there's a plague pandemic across Scotland. This is a terrifying disease. It's elsewhere in Europe as well. And I should say, it spread because of the war more quickly, but it probably would have come with normal peacetime trade anyway. Scotland's a very European nation. It could have been on any number of trading trips. But
people are moving about even more.
Exactly. It exacerbates it rather than causes it. And this is a terrifying disease with no cure. So what do? You lock people in their homes. You restrict movement. But in the 16th century, they also particularly target the poor. And there's a series of acts passed throughout the country. You have it in Aberdeen, in Haddington, in Stirling, really throughout the whole country, in Ayr as well. And these acts say, if you're a poor person from the town, you can stay. You'll be forced to wear a badge. And we've got one of those here in the exhibition that survives from Dundee. So you'll be forced to wear a badge to prove you've got a right to remain, as it were. If you're poor and you're not from the town, you're going to be chucked out into the countryside and heaven help you.
We're not paying benefits for foreigners.
But rich people, of course, they're not mentioned in the Act. The rich folk in the towns are allowed to stay. So it's not just targeting poor people, it's targeting people from out with towns. And so we're seeing the way that these social pressures are really deepening inequalities and allowing these kind of prejudices and these structural problems, these structural inequalities to flourish even more intensely in warfare. Sorry, that was a bit heavy, but I think this is heavy stuff. And I think, again, there's so many parallels.
It shows that nothing changes.
Sadly. If only it did.
All right. Could you tell us about individual stories or individual people?
We're so lucky to have the primary sources to do that. Let's head round the corner and I've got a bread riot for you in the Deuce Fife town of Cooper.
Right, there you go.
Now, Just before Amy tells us more, can I remind you that I'm still touring my live stand-up comedy show, Scotland Made the World, across Scotland in 2026. I'll be coming to Mull and Iona, I'll be coming to Kirkwall and Thurso, I'll be coming to Bathgate and Hawick and Kirkcaldy and Cumbernauld, and one more show I'll be coming back to Stirling, and I'll also in June and July be going all across every province in Canada, from Sydney and Cape Breton all the way to Victoria and Vancouver Island. So go to www.brucefummey.co.uk. I'll see you there, we'll have a laugh.
So we've got loads of fantastic individual stories from this time.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you about one woman, Elizabeth Crichton. She was a war widow. Her husband died at the major Scottish defeat of the war, the Battle of Pinkie.
And that was a huge
defeat, huge defeat. It's ironic because the fact there was such a big Scottish army shows the success of the government in raising it.
Yes.
But it made the defeat even more dreadful when it came. So in the aftermath of this, Elizabeth, she lives near Perth. She's got a daughter, Jane, and she arranges for Jane's evacuation because, and this is in the evacuation agreement, Elizabeth says, I do not have a house or a place of my own strong enough to protect my daughter Jane.
Can I use it in an evacuation agreement?
Yeah.
What was an evacuation agreement?
Well, basically, Jane, the daughter, needed to go and live with a relative. But Elizabeth had to give up her maternal rights to do that. So the agreement is saying, I'm not being coerced, I'm not being forced to do this.
Yes.
And this is how my daughter's going to be cared for. So it also includes, for example, provisions for her daughter's nurse, Bessie McWalter. We think she might have been a Gaelic speaker, Bessie McWalter, to remain with us. There's a bit of comfort and familiarity as well. So we get this kind of intimate snapshot into family life, this family who's kind of really torn apart. And I think it's also important to remember, a lot of people say to me, well, why didn't Elizabeth go with her? Elizabeth was an adult. She was under a stay-at-home order because she was needed for defence.
Right.
So you could send the kids, but adult women had to stay at home and help defend their communities. They were part of the war effort. So that's one example.
Yeah, and there's parallels there to the Second World War as well, isn't
Absolutely,
there?
100%. And I think that story about evacuation is a really interesting one. And it kind of made me rethink Mary, Queen of Scots, because she too was a child evacuee to France. But we never think of it in that way.
Yes.
But these effects, these individual stories, they carry on after the war. And that's something that I think is really important to remember. It's not like peace treaties are signed and all of the fields are able to be fertile again and all the burnt buildings are back up off the ground.
Yeah.
This stays. And we see that in this individual story from Cooper. So Cooper was never invaded by the English. It got off quite lightly. But it's really struggling economically in the post-war years.
Because of all the taxes.
Because of the taxes, the inflation. It was a thriving market town. The bottom's obviously fallen out of that. And we've got such interesting stories. In 1552, the bakers go on strike for 8 days.
Right.
Because they say they can't, they're told to cap the price of bread because no one can afford it. And they say, well, we can't make a profit, so we're not going to make it. So we've got an 8-day bakers' strike. And then in 1554, we had a huge riot in the high street in Cooper.
Wow.
The ports, the gates were blocked. And it actually leads to parliamentary legislation, which we see here, restricting the right to gather on high streets. So this kind of riot is affecting national politics. And we know the name of the lead rioter, a man called Nicol Earth, who's really not from a particularly wealthy background, but he's there, mentioned as the leading of the riot, which leads to this parliamentary change. So we really get to know people and get a sense of them. Nicol's always in trouble for shouting at the town council and the Baileys. So maybe some of our audience can relate to that feeling as well.
I can imagine. And that's a really interesting story. And you can see parallels in so many of these things where, is there any sense in which those times during this period has impacted on Scotland today?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. If we just step over here, I've got stuff I could show you to tell you about that. So we said at the start of our chat that Henry VIII partly invaded Scotland to make it Protestant, and Scotland has remained Catholic. And so part of why this war was fought was to keep Catholicism, keep the old faith in Scotland. But 10 years after peace treaties are signed, not very long at all, the Scots cast all that aside, they have a major rebellion, and they embrace Protestantism.
Right.
And that's the moment when Scotland becomes Protestant. And that's the moment that allows union with England. and later on the formation of the British Empire.
So is that because James was fighting against the national will, or had the national will changed in that time?
James
V. So James V was.
Oh, you mean before the war? Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about James VI. People wrote about Union there. Yeah.
No, apologies.
Okay, no.
But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So James V is the Catholic.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point to make, Bruce. So before the war, under James V, Scotland's very, very strongly Catholic.
Yeah.
People are donating heavily to the Catholic Church. The King has a really strong, firm faith. Yes, there are some people who've converted to Protestantism, but they're in the minority and they're regarded as heretics. And the country as a whole is uniformly Catholic. And we see that love for the Catholic faith after the war as well. People are still donating. They want to rebuild the monasteries that have been destroyed by the English. They want Catholicism to survive. But 10 years later, a majority of people, or at least a very vocal, very powerful, but sizable minority, push against it. Why is that sudden change? And I think the answer is the aftermath of war. People are struggling economically. There's no peace dividend. Prices don't return to pre-war levels. Crops don't suddenly grow. And the alliance with France, which was so crucial to winning the war, kind of draws Scotland into all these European politics. And guess what? That means more tax. So you've got higher and higher taxes. And you actually see that on these coins, right? These show Mary, Queen of Scots, married to her new French husband. Imagine paying your taxes with one of those. Your hard-won money, you know everything's more expensive and you're handing it over to pay your high tax bill, and you're seeing the reason for that tax bill there,
and
the alliance.
explicitly says you're French now, or you know what I mean?
The Scots are French and the French are Scots. That's the line. And by 1559, 1560, enough people have been struggling with all this economic pressure that they are willing to talk to heretics. They're willing to go and listen to the likes of John Knox. And we've got his history of the Reformation, his famous story of what happened in Scotland in this time there. But when you read it, and you know all these stories of the war, it's surprising how much stuff there is about the economy in there.
Yes.
He says you've been smited with high taxations. You've fed the idle bellies of the French soldiers.
Yeah.
So it's economic arguments that are being made to foment religious revolution.
Yes.
And so I think when we're asking, why did Scotland become Protestant? Why was there union with England? Why was there the British Empire even?
Yes.
The answer is the economic impact of the wars of the 1540s.
Yeah. That's incredible, because it kind of opens our eyes to things that we haven't really. I've never thought about in that sense before. What an absolute treat to have been given that insight by you today. Now, people could come and visit this exhibition and find out more. It's in the Wardlaw Museum in St Andrews. When's it on? How long's it on for? How much does it cost?
It's on now. It's absolutely free. You don't need to book, so you can just turn up and come on in. And it's on till the 20th of September. The museum's open every day. Opening hours vary by day, but that's all on the Wardlaw's website. So yeah, free exhibition. We've got loans from throughout Scotland, some really amazing, rare things. So yeah, come and see and find out a bit more about this fascinating and understudied period.
Brilliant. And would you be kind enough to give us some stories that we haven't had time for, specifically for our Patreon members?
I think just for you and your Patreon, Bruce.
All right,
I
can we go outside
just manage that. Let's do that. Get some fresh air.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
So, there you go. Now, they often say that our understanding's skewed because history is written by the victor. But bizarrely, it's also skewed because it's hidden by our heroes. It's wonderful exhibitions like this one and proper historians like Amy that help us understand what was really going on. So come and see this exhibition if you can. I hope you got as much out of it as I did with the chat with her. We could only skim the surface in the time that we had, and I'm going to have a longer chat with her for my Patreon members. Check that out in the Patreon page. Now, a while back, I had a chat with Amy and another expert from this period, Stephen Reid from Glasgow University, and I posed the question, what if Mary had never come back from France? Now that was an interesting conversation. That video is coming up on screen now. If you enjoyed this video, then hype it, share it, and watch the next one. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member, or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, ha mi yn doch ys gw'n fi lam alai. Sherry and Drast.